order. Have we had declaration of public notice? Yes. Thank you. Does anyone have any recommendations for the order of business, or shall we let the agenda stand? All right, hearing nothing, we'll move on then to public appearances. And tonight we have several people with us, starting with Valerie, I believe, Valerie Dry. Thank you. If you'd like to come up. It's always good to have company, right? All right. And please, if you would, state your name and address.
My name is Valerie Dry. My address is 5717 Tony Walker Trail in Monona.
Thank you.
Okay, I wrote it down. October is actually Dyslexia Awareness Month, so it's very timely. How do our schools evaluate and provide appropriate education for dyslexic students? Lily, my daughter, is in 2nd grade at Monona. It's been a very long journey for us of what's going on here. Well, she's dyslexic. As a mom, I was encouraged to find that dyslexics can have great success with the proper tools. Among those that were dyslexic were Albert Einstein, Schwab, Charles Schwab, Cher, Harrison Ford, and the list goes on, since there are 10 to 20% of our population is dyslexic, of which most go undiagnosed. There are scientific and research-based studies that show the difference between the brains of a dyslexic and a non-dyslexic. It is a neurological reading disability. There's proven evidence-based research that successfully work with the dyslexic mind. The International Dyslexia Association, the IDA guidelines, recommend at least 2 one-hour sessions a week with a one-on-one therapist using the Orton-Gillingham method for phonics and readings. I thought, great, this is awesome. My daughter, I found it. I have a trained Orton-Gillingham speech therapist who's willing to come. And then I found out she's working at Winnequa already with another child. Sign me on. I was very excited to start the therapy because the IDA also specifies that the key ingredient to success is early intervention in life also. The school denied my request, and it was going to be at my expense, by the way. I spoke with the principal, reading specialist, Lily's teacher, and I emailed Krista McComber. Preliminary testing that they did showed at school, Lily was progressing enough and did not qualify for the specific learning disabilities. In search of answers this summer, I had Lily tested and found that she is cognitively at 95 percentile, but school has her barely reading at grade level. Definitely a disconnect somewhere, and it's because she's dyslexic. However, because she's bright and compensating on her own, the school sees her as progressing, therefore does not qualify for reading assistance. The school's answer to me is Lily's not, I'm paraphrasing for myself, she's not failing enough to warrant a remedy. Why would we wait for her to fail? Because with dyslexia, it's shown, it's evidence-based, that if you provide the correct intervention, thank you, it works. Especially when it's proven that early intervention, why would we wait till she fails? Especially when it's proven that early intervention is key. She will fail, if not in 3rd grade, but 4th grade, when they no longer teach how to read, but teach from reading. Well, she's not learned the basics of phonics to read.
I just want to pause for a moment. So that's your time, and I understood that another person was donating or devoting their time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What percentage of our students are below grade level in reading that could benefit from a correct diagnosis of dyslexia and intervention? My question to you is, how do we screen specifically for dyslexia in our schools? If a child has been diagnosed, there's not appropriate education currently being provided for the standards that have been found to be effective. Can we contract someone to provide those services to our kids? It's not much different maybe from the hearing impaired specialists that are contracted now currently through CISA. How are kids evaluated for dyslexia? How many are diagnosed in our schools? I bet not very many, in which case means there's a problem either way. Those that are not getting evidence-based learning, and so the ones that are diagnosed dyslexic are not getting what they need because we're not providing the Orton-Gillingham-based intervention. And the ones that aren't diagnosed are not getting the Orton-Gillingham-based intervention. So I guess I'm wondering, how can we fix this? It not only helps my child, but it helps all the other children that are at the lowest levels. There's probably a good percentage that we're missing that we could help. And there's evidence out there that strongly says this works. So why aren't we looking at that?
Thank you. Thanks for coming in tonight. Yeah. Questions? Yes, Susan.
I do have a question. So what kind of advice I don't know how to ask this, did you as a parent get once, because dyslexia isn't always a disability that receives special education services, but don't we do like an eval to determine what happened?
We didn't qualify for eligibility because Lily is compensating because she's bright. She's compensating and hiding her disability. So she still needs that support of the Orton-Gillingham-based intervention. She's not gotten evaluated because she's flying under the radar. She's not going to fly under the radar next year or in 4th grade. I strongly believe that because she doesn't know how to read correctly. And unless we teach her, she's going to fail. So then we're going to wait till she fails. Well, I'm not going to let her do that, and we shouldn't let any other child do that either. It's not right, especially when we know there's a way to fix it.
So isn't dyslexia one of the highest
undiagnosed SLDs? There's a do you want more about how, I don't know quite the numbers.
People who have it or who
Are not untreated.
So is there a place where if you are a parent, so like Jared has 4 kids, and let's say he has one that he thinks maybe is not reading as well as you should. Is there a place where you go to help make the determination of
you can get,
what services you need?
You can get, so she's diagnosed. You can have, I don't know what your question is, but so there are certified Orton-Gillingham people who can test for dyslexia, and there's treatment therapies and guidelines as to the recommendations of how to treat them.
And then, do you have to request an evaluation of student services to have her evaluated within the system?
I don't think we do, so I don't know how she flew under the radar, because she should have been caught, I believe. I caught it. I didn't ask anybody for help. I was just going to help myself. And when I was denied, then it came up, well, okay, I can't help my child in school and provide the services that I think she needs. What do you have? Well, nobody ever came and said, hey, I think she needs this. So I'm not the only mom with a child that needs this. I actually have been talking to a lot of my friends. There's a whole bunch of us out there, and they're really struggling, and they're frustrated.
Do we know about any children that, you had said that there was a person that you had come in
Yes.
twice a week?
That's me.
Is that what you're talking about?
So I should have one twice a week come in. I did not start her yet.
But you made a reference that we had already allowed that for a year.
Yes.
Okay, and did that was your job? Did that child have an evaluation? Do we recommend that you have an evaluation so then we can provide our services? Is that how that works?
No, I mean, he was tested just with the
test that everybody else does.
How did you know that he was dyslexic? Did you ask them, or did you do it on your own?
I paid for it on my own. I said to the school, so should I read my spiel or should I? No, not yet. Okay, sorry. In kindergarten, it was clear that he wasn't doing well reading. He had a reading specialist through the school, but his scores actually plummeted by the end of the year, where he was like in the 17th percentile, and he had been higher than that. And a couple times I requested a meeting with the teacher and the reading specialist, and I'm like, this doesn't make sense, he's not getting any better. So that summer, we paid privately to have him evaluated by an Orton Gillingham. We didn't know that was his problem, but she diagnosed him with dyslexia.
But he hasn't been evaluated through the school process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming in to speak with us, and we're going to take our next public speaker.
That's her.
Okay, that's
Thank
me.
you.
And I didn't get my type, so I'm hoping I can read my writing.
For the record, could you please state name and address?
Yeah, my name is Teresa Cunningham, and I'm at 5511 Brant Place in Monona.
Did you donate your minutes already, or is this now another?
I'm just shaking your hand. She donated her.
Okay.
Yeah. So my name is Teresa Cunningham. My son Frederick is in 2nd grade at Winnequa. So he had reading help in kindergarten. His scores plummeted. We got him privately tested. He was diagnosed with dyslexia. The International Dyslexia Association recommends a minimum, as Valerie said, of 2 hour-long sessions, one-on-one per week. So my husband and I paid privately for the therapist to come in. She came in through his whole 1st grade year. She came into the school once a week, and then once a week I pulled him out over lunch and recess, and I took him to see the therapist. And I worked part-time at that time, so I could do that 1 day a week. We had this arrangement the entire year, and by the end of the year, Frederick was moved from the lower reading group to the on-level reading group. So at the beginning of this school year, his 2nd grade year, I spoke to his teacher and to our private therapist, and they arranged a time for her to come in twice a week because I work full-time now, and so I couldn't take him out of school, and frankly, he's missing less school if I'm not driving him, taking him out and driving him back and forth. About 2 weeks ago, it was September 12th, we were told that the speech therapist can no longer come to the school to see Frederick. And during the next week, we wrote back and forth with the principal, Angie, and the director of student services, Krista McComber, to inquire why there was this change from the year before. We didn't understand because we were paying privately, and we were told that Winnequa didn't have an Orton Gillingham experienced trained specialist. We also protested having less than a week to try and find a way to get our son to get these services. It's basically like, she can't come anymore. And it's like, well, we work full time. She has a busy schedule. How are we going to continue these services for our son? After we complained about that, we were given 1 more week for her to come. The reasons we were given that the Orton Gillingham therapist could not come to the school include that he can't miss any core subjects. However, the speech therapist was coming during reading. He has reading for an hour and a half at school. She comes for an hour. During that time, he was missing no other subjects. So basically, he was being pulled out of reading to get specialized reading that he could understand. So he wasn't missing any other classes. We were told there was a duplication of services. He's not getting any services currently through Winnequa that are effective for dyslexia. He's not getting any Orton Gillingham instruction, which is a multisensory type instruction, so there isn't a duplication of services. We were told we can't have third parties that aren't contracted, so why not contract our therapist or get another Orton Gillingham therapist, somebody who's competent to teach these kids. Why can't we get them contracted? We get other services contracted. In regards to the very little notice that we were given to make different arrangements, we were told that the decision to not allow our therapist to come in was made at the end of last school year, but no one bothered to tell us that, which is poor. That's just really poor. Like I said, we both work full-time now. We can't make arrangements easily for Frederick. And it leaves us with very little options for our son to get the reading instruction that he needs. Let's see. This week was the first week that our therapist was not allowed to come to school. He's only going to get to be seen once by her this week, and I'm going to have to pull him out of math because that's when I can fit it into my work schedule. So not only is he seen on the lower than what's recommended for him, he is actually going to now miss math too. And miss more school in general because he'll be gone for more than an hour. Let's see, and then kids with untreated dyslexia are statistically proven to be more apt to drop out of school, no surprise, have a teen pregnancy, abuse drugs and alcohol, commit crimes, be incarcerated, and live in poverty. These kids already have to struggle more than the average kid. A lot of them just think they're stupid. Why try? You know, I fail at school, so why even try? Drop out. We are trying really hard to give our kid a chance of being successful, a chance of evening the playing field as much as we can. There's a proven, evidence-based method to instruct these kids so they can be successful, and to give them a shot. And to knowingly deny them this is cruel and unacceptable.
Thank you for coming in tonight to speak. Thank you.
I just want to always clarify that we can't have a discussion about an item that's not on the agenda, which is why
Correct.
more of us aren't talking.
Correct.
Just so you know. So
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yes.
You can ask a question if you need to know more about the details. So if all the rest of you understand the detail of what happened, then you don't ask the question. But if you don't, then feel free.
Can I say something?
Talking about us.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I just have one question, clarifying.
Didn't come off that way.
I think I'm hearing both of, it's not clear to me, I think I'm hearing both of you say that you requested that your child be evaluated, but you were told there was not a need to evaluate him. Is that correct? Or
No, I hadn't requested
You-
yet.
Okay, so you haven't actually formally requested that he be evaluated yet for a learning disability or dyslexia
Well,
or whatever it turns out to be?
Right, but Krista McComber did say, because I asked her about how do you evaluate for dyslexia, and she says, I quote, "We don't formally diagnose dyslexia in schools, but we assess reading ability in multiple ways, and we provide and support a wide array of reading interventions that are evidence-based." But it's not for dyslexia, because the school district's not calling it dyslexia. If you're not calling it dyslexia, the evidence-based intervention you're giving is not for dyslexia. So she says, in schools, we are required to determine not only if a child meets eligible criteria. Well, my child's not going to meet the eligible criteria. They already told me that because she's 95% in cognitive ability. She's scooting by and you guys aren't seeing her. And so she's not going to qualify for that criteria. But she is dyslexic. She's diagnosed dyslexic, and she's not getting the SLD help at all. This is a hot topic, I know, but it's an important one that all of the kids need to have if they're dyslexic.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one more, folks. There we go.
Do you want to ask for the name of the third person whose time?
Oh, I apologize.
Technically. Oh, you
Right.
have it already, if you have it.
The person who devoted their time.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
Rochelle Miller.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Just so we
thank
have
you.
the name and address.
I apologize.
There was a three extra
Yeah.
fee.
Right.
Okay.
We just had that, I just wasn't sure you'd turn one in, that's all. Thanks.
No worries, okay. All right, that takes us to our consent agenda, which we could approve as whole. Do you need, let me pause. Are we good to move on? Okay, all right. That takes us to our consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve? Or do we want to?
So moved.
Thank you. A second? Do we have a second for the consent agenda as it is on the document in front of us?
I'll second.
Pardon me. Thank you, Boardman Simpson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The consent agenda has been approved. I don't know. That takes us to recognitions. Do we have any recognitions this evening?
Yes, come on, you guys. Heads up. Hey, Connie.
Go ahead.
I can't remember the exact amount. $3,000
$3,082 or something.
over, oh, I can see it this. So, do you want to tell us the teacher and what you got?
Leah Ray Russo.
An MG grad, who is
First grade
teaching.
teacher. Right, wrote a Healthy Schools grant.
Oh, right, I
and
did see that. I
received-
saw that in the newsletter,
Yeah.
Yeah, Healthy Classroom Grant, to take the first graders to Aldo Leopold. And again, this is $3,000 for first grade students. Again, really neat. And I do have to confess, I'm on that board, and I've been encouraging people from this school district to write those grants for the last 5 years. And thank you for stepping up and getting one. And she'll be honored at an event in November. And she will be honored.
It's 2 this year, that's good.
Yeah.
That's great. Anything else for recognition?
I had one. I wanted to thank all the staff at our high school. We had a open house recently, last week Wednesday night. And as a parent myself of a new high school student, I thought the format and the content of what they did was exceptional. I didn't realize until being there that night what a commitment that is on the part of all of our staff to pull that off. We went to every single class. And I also thought 8 minutes was just the right amount of time. We got some good content, and then we're out of there before anyone started wanting to fool around. And I just thought the whole thing was just really well executed, and I wanted to thank them top to bottom across that whole school for what they did, because it was extremely pleasant and impressive.
Thank you.
I'm going to second it, because I was there also. It was cool. You see, they have to go up, down, up, down.
The presentations from our staff were just, they were all engaging, interesting, gave us a good sense of the personality of the teachers as well as the content of what they'd be learning, and I thought the whole thing was really excellent.
Great. If I may, I don't know if this qualifies, but we did have cake tonight, thanks to district personnel. Next week is school board week, so we got the festivities tonight, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Do you want to recognize us?
I will. I had it on my list, so I will finish it. But thank you. So, and I don't think the public necessarily knows, obviously you have your 2 meetings a month, but of all the other committee meetings, preparation, non-official, duties of attending things, not only as parents but as board members, and so I think it is great that, and I'm not sure if it's a national thing or if it's, Wisconsin, so sponsored by the School Board Association, but it's certainly well deserved and worthy of recognition. So thank you for all you do.
All right, that takes us to correspondence and yes.
As long as, again, it's always hard when the gift donations are in the, I also want to mention, I thought somebody else was going to do it, that's why I didn't do it, but the Monona Grove Education Foundation donated $7,490 for teacher grants. Now that included a number of you probably know, a number of teacher grants, and they will be holding their gala, which fundraises for those grants on Saturday, November 4th, so we're hoping you buy tickets. If you really want to go, just pull on my shoulder and we'll find somebody that'll buy you a table and we'll put you there. So it's really, and it's honoring Rebecca Fox Blair, MG21, so this is really neat event. We've had fun every year.
All right, thank you. That takes us to correspondence and announcements. I didn't see any content listed there. So.
Again,
okay.
I have to fess up. So I had received a call about, a contact about what services do we provide for dyslexia, and I referred those individuals to teacher, principal, and Krista. And it's my understanding that those processes are being followed. And then I received another note about land purchase, and I referred that to either Dan or Jerry. I sent it on and told them to contact you guys because there would be an FAQ that was being published, would be available tonight. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That'll take us then to our administrative reports. starting with our report on school resource officers.
Okay, great. Well, this evening, we have with us, if you'd like to step up, we have Luke Wunsch, who serves our Monona schools. And Jess Hanglin, who is our new resource officer for serving our schools in Cottage Grove. So they can introduce themselves a little further and talk. They're going to talk briefly about what they do and a number of things, and then we'll certainly have time for some follow-up questions from our board members as well. So, welcome.
I'm Luke Wunsch, work with the Monona Police Department. A little bit of background and training. I have an associate degree in criminal justice from Fox Valley Technical College. I have 12 years of law enforcement experience, 10 plus here in Monona. Numerous trainings in drug identification, interview and interrogation, evidence technician, so I collect all the evidence for our police department. I'm a field trainer, so I train all of our new officers that get hired. Social media and cyber investigations training. Alice instructor, which is the new model we're going to be transitioning to for our active intruder, active shooter stuff in the school district. And I am also part of NASRO, which is the National Association for School Resource Officers. So I went through training recently for that in preparation for my position here that I started last year.
I'm Jessica Helgeland. I've been with the Cottage Grove Police Department for 12 years. I just started this position in August, so I'm still learning, but so far it's been awesome. So I have an associate degree from Madison College. I have the drug training that Luke has gone to. I'm also a field training instructor, so I train all the new people coming in. Alice instructor, I'm a defense and arrest tactics instructor, a tactical response instructor, along with other instructions. And I'm also, for the past 4 years, I've also been teaching at Madison College in the Recruit Academy. I'm also part of NASRO, so I'll just talk a little bit about what Luke and I learned during our training. I apologize for reading this, but there's a lot of information and I want to make sure that you guys have it all. So we both attended the NASRO basic course. It was a week-long course. We learned about what can help us become a successful SRO and our responsibilities. The SRO is big on a triad program. So first of all, we're a law enforcement officer. That's our main role, is we are the police. But in the school, it promotes a large part of community policing. We promote effective investigation and resolution of crimes occurring on campus. And our presence supports a safe and orderly environment where students feel safe and educators feel that extra support in their role to help keep our kids safe. The second part of that triad is that we're also a teacher and guest speaker. So even though our primary role is safety, we also serve as a teacher in the fact that we offer law-related safety and related education due to our expertise and specialized knowledge. And that also helps build a relationship with the students and can improve their perceptions of law enforcement as a whole. The last part of that is we're an informal counselor and mentor. So in the fact that we are another adult in their life that can help them make good choices. We gain that rapport with students by keeping up with their academic and extracurricular activities and just talking with them and providing an open ear when they want to talk.
Next we're going to kind of go over, and this is kind of summarized for the both of us here, our day-to-day activities. We kind of came up with 4 main components or goals for each day. Number 1 is building safety and security. We make sure everybody in the building is safe, all the vehicles are safe. At the high school we have open campus for lunch. That's also part of my responsibility, which if you know where the Monona Grove High School is, it's kind of surrounded by Madison. So a lot of our students go out off campus to other businesses outside of Monona that I help keep stuff safe and secure and no problems, hopefully. But that also entails secured entrances, drugs, weapons, violations, unwanted visitors, any medical calls that come into the school we respond to. Part of our trained expertise. There's not always a nurse in the building or a first responder, so we kind of double down as that. Probably more so for the high school, parking enforcement, but it goes along with security, knowing what vehicles are in the parking lot, what vehicles belong there, and unwanted visitors and or weapons in vehicles that don't belong there. Being a positive role model, which Officer just mentioned, being that triad pyramid, getting into the class, being the mentor, being the positive role model, hopefully being a good example for the students that we interact with on a daily basis. And number 4, the prevention of crimes. A lot of what police do and administration do in schools, as much as we try to get ahead of things and teach and educate our children how to make proper decisions and be prepared for the future, it's a lot of reactionary. This happened and now we have to deal with it. So we try to do the preventative stuff by building these relationships with the students and staff so that we can share information mutually. So this counselor talks to a student, something happens. They can share certain parts of that information with us, and we have cases that happen outside in the community where we're familiar with their families, and we can share information with the school to say, well, maybe this is why Johnny's having such a bad day in school, because this is what's happening at home. So it kind of helps that communication and a more cohesive team when we help the children and the students. Education on alcohol, drugs, laws, privacy, rights, you name it, we will talk about it if we're asked. We both, Jess, have you had the opportunity to go into the classroom yet?
Next week.
Next week. So we both have our first class that we get to go into next week for the year. Mine is Monday, right away, first period, so that should be exciting. Get to go and do some practical law stuff. That's a huge part of how we do prevention, is education on all various topics. And that's not necessarily always in the classroom. I think Jess would attest that we could be out for her on the playground at recess, lunch recess, or walking through the halls and the kids have questions about something they saw in the news, or something that happened over the weekend, or Mommy and Daddy were doing this at home, is this illegal? You get all kinds of stuff that's just off the wall. And then, again, the ability to share information with school administrators and counselors that's important and pertinent to incidents that are happening inside and outside of school. So that touches, I think, kind of most of our day-to-day operations and what we do.
So uniform, most people think about police officers and you see them in full uniform. This is how Luke and I go to school. We call it a soft uniform. So the SRO program looked at the uniforms and they found that a soft uniform actually was better because it's easier for the kids to come and talk to somebody who's not dressed up in full gear, because it kind of looks scary, especially to the younger kids. It's intimidating. But also with that is our visibility. So the first week in school, I wore a full uniform so that the kids could see my face, see that I was a police officer, so that they knew who I was, especially in staff as well, because I'm new there, so they didn't really know me. But now I go in a soft uniform and I have kids coming up to me all day long. And they didn't do that the first week of school. So I like going in a soft uniform because it humanizes us as a person and it doesn't make us look like we're that robot cop out on the street. So it really does help humanize us as people so that the kids see us as another person and not because that's a police officer. So. And I have a marked squad car up at the school. Luke also has a marked squad car up at the school that sits out front in the parking lot, which is visibility, which is a deterrent to crime. So we do have that.
I would say with the high school too, being in a soft uniform, you're not walking around in that full uniform, maybe in the lunchroom, and I got to go talk to Susie, and everybody's like, oh, Officer Luke, oh, she's in trouble. Oh. It's more, they just look at me as a person, and yeah, I have a badge and a gun and those tools on my belt, but it's not as formal or intimidating to do that, so.
Let me talk about Alice?
Yep.
Okay.
So
Luke mentioned before Alice. It's a hard subject. Nobody wants to talk about it, but unfortunately this day and age we have to. So Alice is our active shooter, violent intruder training. So Luke and I both went to a 2-day instructor course, so we are now certified instructors in this subject. So ALICE stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. It's not a linear response to an event, but it helps give us options as opposed to the traditional lockdown. A violent intruder comes in and we just close the doors and sit and wait. Unfortunately, from past events, law enforcement has learned a lot to the way we respond, and a lot of times those events are over before we can get there. So this gives staff and students options to protect themselves before we can get there. It's our priority. I mean, that's our priority, and the reason why we are doing this is to protect everyone. Safety is our #1 concern. So we are planning on rolling this out here shortly.
I think our first school to get trained is Winnequa Elementary staff. We're going to start with staff, get everybody in the district trained, including the people up at the district office here, and make sure they understand what's going on before we move on to any kind of training with our students, because in a matter of chaos, they're going to look to their teacher or their advisor or their counselor or whoever and say, what are we supposed to do? And if that person doesn't understand what it is they're supposed to do, they're going to be hard pressed to make sure everybody else is where they need to be. Real quickly, Alice is a model that is one of many out there. I was tasked with finding the one I felt was the most appropriate and the most actionable. After talking to our local school resource officers within Dane County, Alice was kind of the consensus pick. So we decided on that, and I went to the training first, came back highly impressed and recommended it to move forward with the school district. And like I said, Officer Jess here is trained, I'm trained, Jeff Carr with maintenance and facilities is trained, Dr. Brost, Principal Brost is trained, as well as James Kamoku over at the middle school and Jason Kling at the high school. So our eventual plan is to get at least one administrator in the building for each school trained, and then come up with a team to have a safety plan in place to help us train this. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm sure there's going to be questions about it, but ALICE, just what it stands for is alert. It's stay alert for your surroundings. Make sure you're aware of what's going on around you. Lockdown is to secure your room, office, school, wherever you're at. Inform is to inform others around you what you're seeing, what's going on. Counter is as a last resort, counter or advance upon the shooter or intruder. And evacuate is always your first option. It's evacuate the immediate area when it's safe to do so. Again, not a linear, so it's just provides you with options, and depending on the circumstances, you may have to choose one option or the other. I think our last thing that we have on our agenda is just to kind of talk about future goals. Our future goal for this year is to train the entire Monona Grove School District in ALICE response model, which is a tall but attainable task. Improve security measures and existing camera infrastructure is a long-term goal, realizing that money is always the bane of our existence, and trying to figure out where we can improve and what we can reduce and change and adapt and go with where technology is. We talked about adding additional educational programs like Eddie the Eagle, which is a gun safety class that is sponsored by the NRA, and it's aimed at elementary schools and middle schools. There's so many guns out in today's society that we want to make sure that the youth is aware of what to and what not to do if they see a gun, tell an adult type of situation. I'm currently working with a social worker at the high school on AODA programs to come into the school because we don't really have one right now. We're also working with Chris McComber on that. I would like to continue to improve Lunch with Lunch because now there's 2 school resource officers. I can't just call it Lunch with Lunch, which was done in the middle school level. Kids get rewarded and get some wings tickets, and they can put them into a drawing to win prizes, and I would reward them with bringing pizza and soda in for the winning student and 2 of their friends. So now Jess is going to be paying for the pizza, but we got to come up with a new nifty nickname for it. So that's a goal, and I think Jess wants to talk real briefly on Red Ribbon Week at GDS.
So Red Ribbon Week is October 23rd through the 31st. It's a drug prevention program. I asked my police chief if our police department could also help out and get involved. So basically the kids will take a pledge to stay away from drugs and alcohol, and we teach them about drugs and alcohol and about how the negative effects that has on your body. So our police department actually ordered 1,000 of those plastic bracelets that
Like
are red.
like the Live
Like
Strong
the Live Strong
bracelets.
So they ordered 1,000 bracelets for all of the students, so we can hand them out during that week. So it'll be a fun week. I'm still trying to plan it out, but I'm looking forward to that.
That'll be kind of our pilot program. If it works there, we'll
Mhm.
move it around to the rest of the schools. So I think that's pretty much all we had. Unless there's questions. No?
You have a statewide organization, and you have professional development and ongoing
As far
training and learning through that operation?
So the NASRA is a national organization. I don't know of a statewide program yet. They do have a juvenile association as well, which is very similar to the school resource officer program that's out there. We meet on a monthly basis with all of the local school resource officers, and we use that as a resource to look for pertinent trainings, what's going on, what are the trends in school for drugs, alcohol. I've talked to some of the other SROs about truancy and how they were handling it since I was new last year. There's not like a set, you gotta go to this kind of training each year or month or week to keep like a certification. But I think as you can see from our training experience, we're always looking to adapt and stay ahead of the curve. So, I mean, this year I was lucky enough to go to the school resource officer conference up in Appleton. It was a 4-day conference. They have keynote speakers that come in and talk about, they talked about the Columbine shooting, the principal was there for that. They talked about alcohol and drug trends. They had people from ICAC, which is Internet Crimes Against Children, come in and talk and give us all kinds of presentations on things, tools for us to go to and learn and adapt and become better at what we do. I recently went to the social media and cyber investigations class, which was a 4-day class about how to scour your kids or your Facebook profiles and come up with public information that helps in investigation purposes of things that are good or bad going on within the community and within the school district. So that's been a very useful tool so far.
You do have a statewide organization and network, it looks like, in which you maintain updating.
Yes, we definitely have
exchanging ideas and information.
Absolutely, and part of the National Association is you get hooked up to an email chain where if people have questions, you can submit it to there, and it goes out to everybody that's participants in the national organization. So you could get responses from Missouri or California or wherever around the country to see how they're dealing with problems or issues. I mean, I have telephone numbers in my phone for the La Follette School Resource Officer or Educational Resource Officer, they call them over there. Madison East, Memorial, Waunakee, Stoughton, Middleton, all of those guys are part of my tools on my belt, if you will. So if I don't know how to deal with something, or our students are interacting with their students, we can hash it out a lot faster and easier.
Is there a network of middle school ones?
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
It's the same. It's just, I'm just working in a middle school, but it's still part of the entire thing that.
Are we unique in having one working with middle school?
Nope.
Nope. Mm-mm.
I know Middleton for sure has both a high school and a middle school SRO. And it really is dependent upon the population and the school size. When you think about it, the size of our middle school is almost 1,000 students, I believe, and we're at just about 1,100 in the high school. So to have that many students without somebody being able to respond, I mean, last year I was dealing with 2,000 students, not to mention all the staff and outside visitors coming into the building. I very much appreciate you guys approving Jess's position because it's made my life a lot less stressful.
Okay, let me just clarify, we're not even though the majority of the resource time is at the high school, middle school, it's K-12, all 5 schools, actually all 6 schools, including MG21 are served.
Thank you. Carrie. Jennifer.
Thanks for coming. And it's fun to meet you in your soft uniform, or as you call the new soft uniforms. Are you considering coming to the Glacial Drumlin Parent-Teacher Conference nights? Or is that even on your radar? I don't know if that's kind of like a parent event like that might be on your radar.
I've read that it's a good idea to be there, so I was going to ask the school if it would be okay if I was there, just so that the parents can meet me.
That was my thought too.
I'll be calling parents from time to time, so I think it'd be important for them to meet me in person.
I was thinking about that too, and then at the same time thinking if you were in your full uniform, maybe no one would talk to you.
Exactly.
Same as just
when we are in full uniform, people look at us like
differently.
I mean, I know.
They they're allergic to us. In a soft uniform, we're just another person.
I know, so I was thinking about it, I'm not even sure what would be the right thing for like a parent, because on the one hand you want them to instantly know what your role is and what you do.
Right.
So I'll leave that up to you,
Yeah.
but I will come say hello to you if you're there that night. And I had another question too. Total first world problem, and I'll just mention it, but I know during our back to school, like the orientation thing, it was reminded to our middle school kids how important it is for them to wear their bike helmets when they're biking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious what your role is in that kind of topic, or if that's too trivial to.
No, so next week I'm actually going and speaking to the health class, so that will be part of that.
I mean, you don't bust people for that. I don't know a better way to put that question, but like, I mean, does that come up in your interactions with kids?
It doesn't. Our police department, though, however, during the summertime, we get coupons from Culver's and McDonald's and Arby's, and you guys do it too. So that when we are out and about in our squad car and we see somebody, a kid wearing their helmet, we'll stop them and give them free ice cream to Culver's or free cookie from Arby's or Subway. So we do talk to them. And then if I see a student or a child who does not have their helmet on, but their friend does and their friend gets a coupon, I'm like, well, you gotta put your helmet on. And once you know it, the next day I see them with their helmet on.
Oh, that's fun. So thanks for that,
Yes,
because the social hurdle that I see at the middle school is going from where it was okay to wear snow pants when you were in elementary school, and now you can't wear snow pants.
'Cause it's not cool.
I mean, that kind of stuff. And the other one that comes up for me that I'm just thinking about your role, or whether it's too trivial to deal with or not, is riding in the front seat, because we've enforced this like family policy that you have to be 12. But that's becoming more difficult to enforce when the classmates who are clearly not 12 are riding in the front seat. Now, I'm going to be known as the weird school board lady who doesn't want people riding in the front seat. But I'm just sort of thinking, am I wrong about the 12-year-old limit? Or?
There is no age limit for the front seat. You could have a car seat in the front seat.
Uh-huh.
It's just their seat, like whether they're in a car seat or a booster seat, and then their age and their weight. So 8 and 80 is pretty much the cutoff where they don't have to be in a car seat or anything, as long as they fit in the seatbelt, their knees are bent at 90 degrees, and their feet hit the floor. But the safest spot for kids, yes, is in the back seat.
And the main reason for that is the airbags too.
There's the
airbag thing
That's
I
what's
was
going to
thinking
hurt the
about.
kids, not necessarily the impact that's going to be the airbag.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that.
They're
'cause-
not
right.
hard here yet, so, and until they're about 16.
Thank
I went
you.
through that child safety seat class, so.
I just knew I was going to take advantage. I knew you would know the answer, but then also that's the kind of thing I would imagine parents might quiz you about.
Actually, no, I have not.
Parent night?
No, nothing.
Like, is this okay?
Yeah.
When you were making the comment earlier about people come ask you, my parents are doing this, is this illegal?
Yeah.
Thinking that's the kind of thing, like, you know, we're right in the front seat, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. So Nazar, does that train you specifically for kids or just to be in the schools?
It's more pertaining to the schools. I mean, part of NASRO is we've been to enough schooling that we've probably beat it to death how to develop a lesson plan and how to get up in front of a class and give a presentation that's age appropriate.
Right.
That is part of the class, but most of it is differentiating the laws that would be different from being on patrol on the road versus being in the school. You know, what perks or differences are there that are going to affect your day-to-day operations.
Yeah, I mean, doing the lesson plan is easy, but it's dealing with 1,000 high school like teenagers, right?
Yeah.
So what's your chain of command? What's your protocol when something happens in school?
when something happens in the school, well, I mean, we can play the what if game all day, it kind of depends on what the scenario is that we're dealing with. If it's a theft from a locker, the school is going to do their due process with the student. Case law has dictated that as a school resource officer, we can observe any interviews that are done within the school, that the admin team would take care of and interview the students. We can listen as long as we're an observer in the room and don't participate in the interview or guide it in any certain direction. We can use all the information from the interview for any investigation that we may need. So typically, how I do it is the school does their due process and I let them do their whole, whatever they need. If I don't have the answers for what I'm looking for at that point, then I can continue questioning students or witnesses or whatever it may be. And then come to a conclusion. The school, any kind of discipline they do is separate from whatever law enforcement or school resource officer does, and we don't have any influence over the other as to what happens. You know, if something happens and the school wants to suspend a student for 3 days, I can't say, well, John was good this week, I think we should only give him a day and a half. And same thing if it's a theft and the victim wants to pursue charges against them for whatever was stolen, the school can't say, well, we should not do that. Our goals in the school is not to just come in and write everybody tickets. That's the least desirable part of our job. That does not build rapport, does not make those strengthened relationships that we're looking for to get that communication and that information highway we're looking for. So, you know, we're looking for other alternatives to get the desired result in the end. One brief example, I had a truancy case last year. Student absolutely did not like coming to school. He wanted to be working at his full-time job. And got to the point where he got a ticket for truancy, got another ticket for truancy because it wasn't sinking in. And the third time I wrote up a student contract that said, well, look, I know you're not going to be here, but if you go a week and go to all your classes, I will withhold the next ticket that you are eligible to get. And it worked for about a week, and then he lost interest. But, you know, we're looking for other alternatives because writing a high school student a bunch of tickets is not going to be productive for them. They may or may not have a job. It may might default on the parents for payment, which is a burden to them if they're already dealing with other issues. So, you know, we're always looking for different avenues to reach out and try something different.
So, like truancy, wouldn't you work with the social worker or the psych or counselor? Well,
not necessarily. So, in a typical truancy case, the school monitors the attendance. Right. So once they reach, by state law, it's 5 partial or all of classes on 5 days. Usually we're beyond that when it comes across my desk. So I'll get a letter saying the student missed X amount of days. These are the days that they missed. And then I will follow up with the student and or the family and find out, you know, what's going on here. What's the home life like? Why are you not attending because you're working full time because you've got other circumstances? And depending upon how that goes, you know, they may receive a citation. They may receive a warning. They may say, hey, you're 16, 17, maybe you should apply for HSED instead of being at school all the time. You can take your tests and be done. And then I direct them where to get that information from. I do home visits, as I'm sure Jess will this year, with social workers if there's a concern for student or safety at home. That's not something I go and just delve into on my own. But one of the things we didn't mention is, along with our soft uniform, our offices are closely in student services. I am in student services in the high school, and Jess is 2 doors down from the counselors at the middle school. So I work really closely with my student services at the high school, and I would say we're almost always on the exact same page of where we're at with kids and where we need to be and all of that communication. So I guess the chain of command is I kind of do something if I have questions or concerns. I mean, certainly the administration and I bounce ideas off of each other as well as student services. And I can always go to my supervisor or my resources of my other SROs to say, hey, this is what I got, I'm maybe not quite sure what to do, what are your thoughts, what are your questions, comments, concerns?
It seems truancy would be the perfect spot for a restorative circle, much more than a ticket.
Well, it is, except that most of the kids that are truant aren't open about their feelings and why they're not wanting to come to school. So, I mean, we've tried a couple restorative justice circles. The only hiccup with that is it has to be willing participants,
right.
And they'll start out with whatever the issue is. Yes, I absolutely want to do this, and then it comes time to do the restorative circle, and one party or both back out because they don't want to confront whatever the issue is.
That does a deep issue. I get that.
Yeah.
So if there's a theft in the locker, you sit in on the interview. Everything the kid says can and will be used against them because they aren't read their rights. They don't have any rights at that moment. Is that do I understand that?
Well, while the school is doing their due process, correct. The school's allowed to do their due process without reading Miranda or any of that that law enforcement has to do.
Even if you're in the room and you will use everything they say against them.
Correct.
And they have no idea that that's the case.
I mean, typically we don't tell them that that is. Usually the administration says, Officer Wunsch is here, Officer Luke is here, just as an observer. And if when I'm done with the interview, there's more questions or follow-up that need to be done, then he will ask.
Say anything stupid.
Well,
you're going to pay for it, right? I mean, that's pretty.
I mean, the idea behind the school resource officer in the school is that they work with the administration team and staff there.
Right.
The whole goal is student and staff safety. The courts have gone case over case over case and determined that that's how they wish to
right.
proceed with it. So.
I have no doubt the courts have thrown the kids in the wolves for years. I get that.
And that's not our goal,
right.
is to throw these kids in.
And I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying that's...
So a lot of times that comes down to the mentoring part of our triangle, or triad, is that we're teaching these kids to make good or better decisions and guide them the right way, because we understand that they're kids, and that frontal cortex that they always talk about is non-existent. So they think something is fun, and then they'll do it without thinking about the consequences. So it's us just educating them about this is what happens when you do something like this, and once you get older, you're going to find yourself in those consequences, and there is no more talking. So that's what we like to do.
And a big part of that, I'm sorry, I don't want to, a big part of that is educational. Like I'm just there to observe.
Yeah.
The school does their whole process, and I already know ahead of time, like, this isn't something I'm going to write you a ticket for. It's not even possible. Kid doesn't want to pursue charges because we've already talked to all the victims and whatnot beforehand. And I can do the educational piece. Well, if they wanted to pursue charges, this is what would happen. Oh, I didn't realize I could get a $313 ticket for theft or whatever the case is. Or realize that once you go over a certain threshold and you turn 17, it could be a felony. So that educational piece is very important. And with juveniles that Jess is dealing with, that some of them can't be even issued citations. I think it's a lot more important for the high school kids age MG21 to hear those consequences and actually say, wow, that I could have really screwed up, but now I have an opportunity to fix that or make a better decision in the future. Whereas the administration could spitball and throw random things out and have the same expertise in the field that we do.
How many tickets do you normally write in a week?
In a week?
Yeah, or a year?
I think I have 3 tickets this year and 2 of them are parking tickets.
Yeah.
So,
so it's rare to write a ticket.
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily rare, but I wouldn't say it's common practice. It's kind of, I can't even really go to put a number on it because I could go weeks without writing a ticket. Or in this case, we've been almost a month in, and like I said, I have 1 citation. And it could go another 3-4 weeks without one, or I could get 4 right in a row.
I had a parent call me and tell me that their son got a disorderly conduct ticket for saying the F word.
That's possible.
That's realistic.
But it's not.
I didn't believe it. So
if I'm talking to you and I just say the F word, it's a different scenario than standing in a classroom full of people, yelling it multiple times, and other surroundings happening with it, right? The philosophy that I have been told is that the high school, for example, the students are maturing and they're growing up and they're trying to teach them how to be young adults and make responsible decisions, right? So if something happens in the high school and you were in public, what would happen if you were in public? That same potential consequence could happen over at the high school level. And again, part of that is us educating and not always writing tickets.
Have you ever had to arrest a kid?
I have.
Have you handcuffed at school?
One time.
Yeah. Is there a way we could write policy that that doesn't happen?
I mean, it's kind of frowned upon. We try not to do that, to make a physical arrest at school. I know one time I had to make an arrest, and I didn't have a choice. You know, it was forced upon me. And I walked the student out to my squad car and stood in front of him while the handcuffs went on. It's not like we don't do the, as they used to call it, the perp walk. We don't arrest them in the middle of Commons during lunch and say, well, now we're going to walk past all your friends in handcuffs because, you know, I want to embarrass you.
But if you, not you, but if you want to arrest, say, a business owner, right, who did something wrong, you would call his lawyer and be like, you need to turn yourself in the next 2 days, right? For the most part.
Well, we try to communicate, and you can speak to this too. We try to communicate with the person that we're seeking out, and give them the opportunity to turn themselves in or to do whatever. Obviously, there are always the heat of the moment scenarios where you're not necessarily going to give them the opportunity because of whatever the circumstances are around. Where, for your safety, my safety, the safety of the building, you know, you have to be in handcuffs right now. And you know, it's kind of an officer discretion deal, and I work again closely with the admin, as does Jess, and you know, that's not something we want to do is put restraints on students. I am as hands off as possible when it comes to students. If you can't tell already, I like to talk, and I will talk till I'm blue in my face if that means I don't have to go hands on with a student, because that doesn't look good for anybody, right?
And as I always say in the board here, we set policy because we're not all going to be sitting here, right? And there's going to be other people that are going to sit here that aren't going to be as, you know, like you. So that's why. True. So I don't know what the policy would be on that, you know. So it's not like you need to. It's like as a general rule, we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because I mean, it does happen elsewhere.
It does,
and
absolutely.
A lot of worse things happen elsewhere.
And one last thing, this is just me being cheap. I know we like pay your salary when you're in schools, but you write a ticket that goes to the city. I don't know how we get around that because like part of writing tickets is to fill the coffers of the city to help. So
I wish that weren't the case.
Right.
I wish we could find other ways to use that revenue.
In Cottage Grove, I don't know if you guys have it or not, but when I write a juvenile a ticket, they're under 17 or 17 and under, they have the option of going to peer court. So they go to a court that's heard by their peers, and they're given a punishment where they have to write a letter of apology or do some community service or some sort of program. If they successfully complete it, that ticket goes away. There's no fine, nothing that doesn't go on any of their juvenile record, nothing. So that's what we have in Cottage Grove to help.
I just want the money to come back to us.
Yeah, exactly.
And I live in Cottage Grove, so if you could write more tickets
all
in
day.
we'd be doing better. So. All right, I'm good.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for taking this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to the superintendent's report.
Okay, I'll keep my report very brief and we'll see if there's any follow-up questions. So last week was our annual fall superintendent's conference. It's co-sponsored with DPI, and so the one most important point that I just wanted to bring to your attention was with regard to teacher licensure. That was one of the pieces that was tucked into the state budget. And so I just added a link this afternoon on the board docs to the DPI site. They're still in the process of finalizing those rules, but the most important piece is that now they'll be going, changing to lifetime licenses. And so, so Lisa Hype sent an email to our staff today with, here's what we know at this point, about how this process will work. The most important piece is for our teachers whose licenses are up this year, so they have an idea of, what has to happen, but, they'll flesh that out and we'll pass it along, so. And then I did attach the agenda, for the conference, so if there's anything on there that piqued your interest that you'd like to hear about, I'd be glad to, answer any questions as well.
It's not so much a question as a comment. We had our Monona Grove show choir there.
Yes.
And I didn't know if you were going to speak. I saw this was on the agenda. Otherwise, maybe we should shout it out as a somewhat belated recognition that could have been mentioned earlier. Do you mind talking about
Well,
that?
I think we did mention it at a previous meeting, but I'll, after the fact, it's absolutely worth mentioning again. They were absolutely fabulous. As I told Lori, after performance, you guys always are, so it wasn't totally unexpected, but nonetheless. And I, just so you know, I received many, many comments from others in attendance as well that were very, very impressed with our kids. So they did very well.
Do we have those pictures up? Did we get any
Yeah,
of
they're
those?
on, they were on
Joyce has
Facebook.
them?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
because that would be a neat thing on the webpage, just because, again, it was, I know there were at least 3 board members there,
Mhm.
and Dan and Joyce, who was hanging over the edge trying to get a picture. And it was, again, the way that they did the voices inside the Capitol, which is challenging because of the echo, was spectacular.
Okay, second item, just wanted to give an update on where we're at with planning ahead for the Facilities Advisory Committee. So we had shared previously the dates and the tentative agendas for each of the 6 meetings, and that hasn't changed at this point. We have a next meeting with our the group from EUA next week, and we'll go through again and see if there's any final adjustments. As far as the committee members, again, I think I sent this out in the email, but just to reiterate, appreciate all the input. We actually had a list of 32 names, and so in trying to get to 20, again, the idea was to make sure that we had diverse representation from each community, parents, non-parents, and to try to have that as balanced as possible. At this point, I gave you the list of the 17 commitments we have. We're still waiting to hear from 3 other individuals, and if it doesn't work in their schedules, we've got many, many other qualified people that from the list. So our goal is to get that wrapped up here, hopefully by the end of the week, and we'll update that list for you, when it's finalized.
That list is looking great.
So, okay.
Jan, I did notice that we had one name. I just wondered what your thoughts about that were. And it probably actually was a really good thing, but there's at least one member who appears to have accepted, who's also on Carrie's committee. And I thought we were going to use that committee to kind of build things, but so was there a thought that that would be a good thing to just...
Actually, we did talk about that, and with the communications team from EUA and Andy Lyons, the idea of we have to figure out exactly, where that committee, we know that it can play a key role as key stakeholders in communications, and we thought it wasn't necessarily that we had to, but we thought having some overlap certainly could be a positive thing, so that was considered as well.
And can you tell me how many of these, again, using the diversity, making sure that both communities were relatively equally represented, that's kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, so that we thought was important, 10 and 10 as far as Monona, Cottage Grove. We also wanted to make sure it wasn't all Village of Cottage Grove representation, that we had some folks from the town as well. And then we didn't, we looked at even male, female. It didn't necessarily have to be 10-10, but to make sure it wasn't, more dominated one or the other. They said likewise with parents. I think we're a little top heavy on parents. I think there's 12 or 13 parents, but we thought it was important not to have more than that, that we have a number of people, of course, are parents of former students. And so it's, again, the goal is to make it as diverse as possible. And the reality is those are all really good people, and we know we'll get a lot of good input. The key that I guess that I was thinking, and I've gotten some other had conversations and emails from other people that aren't going to be on the committee that, weren't necessarily nominated. But we talked about the importance of the communication along the way, not only with the board, but I think our community as well. And I guess, my thought is it's got to be, again, we got to be cognizant of not just the one-way communication. How do we get feedback along the way as well as we're going through with the work and getting information out? And so I had a great email today from a parent that I know had spoken to one of the board members and about a topic that may or may not have come up, and it was really important. And so I put on the list to make sure that it's addressed in some way. Question about schools in both communities, and so I think that's something that I'll bring up at our next team meeting with the UA and the communications piece about how we ensure that we have other voices besides the 20 folks who are at the committee, to make sure that people get that input.
You know what else would be helpful? One of the really great things that was helpful about the Community Engagement Committee was that we basically had a list with kind of a resume, understanding these people didn't apply for the committee, but kind of a thought about that little descriptor that says, previous board president of the Village of Cottage Grove or something, so that if you don't know this person at all, and I was intrigued by the fact that there were people on this list I didn't know, and they were actually from Monona.
I can add that information later. I have that in a spreadsheet to help with that whole process.
And I would say
what committee were they on previously, or what is their relationship,
so that you can
things like that. So I'll be glad to share that
if
out.
somebody says to me, well, how the heck did you pick these people? I have a nice response because you just gave that to me. But if they ask, and I don't, I don't, it would be nice to be able to say they have great experience in this. We could see that. So
we have the final, and obviously we haven't made this public yet because it's not final. And once we do that, I'll be glad to make sure the board has that information as well, so you know who these people are, if you don't know them.
I was going to say, I just kind of went through this, and it looks to me like out of the 17 you have here, 10 are parents and 7 are not. So I think I know 7 are not. So
so I think maybe
I don't know too. So I think that looks pretty
okay. Good.
So this was my little concern about not reporting, and I don't know what you're talking about. But you said somebody emailed me about this really important thing. That's not something that needs to be hashed out by a committee with no board members on it, right? I mean, if these are important things that we haven't thought about it, I mean, shouldn't that?
The board absolutely has to have.
That's kind of our role. So.
Yeah, and I think, Jeff, when we talk about how we report out to the board, the committee's work, I think the very first report, will be an opportunity for feedback from the board as well as, yes, this is a type of, dialogue we want to have back and forth, or no, it's not, and let's improve that. And so, this is going to be, what do we have? It's a good 3-month process. So the board, without question, has to will take ownership of this.
But as I said, it's hard to take ownership of something we have no control over.
Yeah.
So that's been my complaint from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I mean, how will we know without going to the meetings when it gets reported back that we're getting reported back all the information that we need to get reported back?
Well, I guess that's our job to do that, to make sure that is.
So isn't that true with every committee that we have? It's like you don't know what discussion happened at the Community Engagement Committee about the land unless you were there.
Yeah.
So again, that committee is advisory only to the board.
Yeah.
And we are expecting, for instance, using that example of Carrie, to come forward and say, our advice is that the board do better on this, and we're willing to do that role, or we expect the board to do that role. I mean, that's what the report out is supposed to be. We as a board form this committee, we approve the committee, and it's advisory only.
Yeah.
So, and you can attend any meeting that you want.
I think that is important. It's certainly not the expectation that all 7 board members attend every meeting. I think it is the expectation that there are some board members present and you come to what you can. And so I think that will help provide a little bit of that oversight as well. But I have confidence in our communication. I mean, that's what we're paying the folks from EUA, as well as whomever we choose for construction manager. We'll also have communications folks that we have very detailed reports to bring back to the
Right,
board.
but they aren't in our community, so they don't know what's important to our community. Right? I'm just concerned that there's not,
These
see,
people are,
these people are.
oh.
Yeah.
But are they gonna all be here at our meetings though? Probably not. But you can't compare it to Community Relations Committee, because Community Relations has 2 elected members of our community on the, or 3, or however many you got on there now. So it's a different animal when there's an elected board member on there when there isn't, especially with something of this importance. So.
Susan?
Can I just remind the chair that the board did decide on this committee already, so I'm not sure why we're spending this much time talking about it.
The 2 minutes, I'm sorry. Should I
No.
talk in the 3 minutes before the meeting?
No
we
worries
We
either
just
way.
decided the committee, this was the makeup, so.
Okay,
Okay, but we're also discussing
sure.
going forward what we're gonna
Sure.
do.
And actually, it's part of our superintendent's report. It's not even in our discussion section of our agenda tonight. So, on all of those counts, I'm just gonna step in here. I do think we have a very articulated agenda now for the ad hoc as far as dates, sequence of topic, report back to the board. So I would like us to launch that process and monitor that process, and I think that's the intention. I also think if we've hired an architectural firm that's not working on our behalf, that's a whole other, piece to the puzzle, which I don't anticipate that, but I hear your concern, but I don't know why they would not act on good faith.
Although, I don't think they won't act on good. I never said that. What I said was,
Those
they
are
aren't
my
from our
words.
community, so they
That's
won't
fair.
know what is important to our community and what isn't. They'll know what's important to their business and what isn't.
I believe it's their job to ask.
Hopefully they
Right.
intersect.
Yeah, yes.
But again, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you, all right, and that takes us to,
Can I
Oh,
just,
One more.
I just want to add one thing, and actually
Okay.
I can wait and do it in a different spot because we can do this, but I think having this committee and having it report out is going to assist us greatly in a situation that we kind of inadvertently walked into, and that is the whole issue of not putting out public information. I kind of thought we'd have a little more help. I don't know if it's Jill being gone or what. Again, today at whatever it was, 2:30, we got the FAQ. Thank you for doing that. That was really great. Except the actual action took place at the last board meeting. So I would say, I think we need to really be cognizant about being timely about the communication. I think we're a little slow on this one.
Well, that's my next topic, and
Oh, you're going to
so
tell us why we were slow? No, I'm
no, I'm
kidding.
going to tell you why we work slow.
We disagree.
Okay. Okay, so the annual meeting. So the agenda, of course, is finalized, and with regard to the items on the agenda, of course, every year we have the budget hearing piece and then approval of the tax levy, and as far as our communication, the practice has been, and will be again this year, we send postcards out to every residence in the community, and the thing we added this year was a link to the specific webpage that has all the information for the annual meeting. So generally, we've always stated that all the budget documents will be available in the district office for review by Monday prior to, well, that was back in the days of really before electronic communication, that was always the practice, and so now we'll have them available, of course, on the website as well. We added the link to that. With regard to the additional item this year, of course, it's unique to this annual meeting with the proposed land purchase. And we talked about the challenge there was, of course, while negotiating, of course, everything, nothing was public, and so once that document was approved, we knew that at that point it became a public document. So the plan was, at that point, we talked about being intentional and knowing that there always would be a report in our local paper on the board proceedings. Okay, we proactively gave information to that. And then knowing that our timeline for getting those postcards out and having information available for the annual meeting is always 1 week in advance. And so that was always our timeline, is to have the FAQ ready by this week, Wednesday. Unfortunately, there was a post on social media by our news editor, and there wasn't enough information to back that up at that point. And so and that's, it's fine, it's not a matter of blaming, but the reality is we have the information out now, and we will it's an opportunity to make sure we have it out to the community in advance, as well as we'll have a presentation there that evening. So with the communication on that, it's updated on our website at this point. We have sent out Infinite Campus messages to all of our parents. We've sent it to all of our staff, and then the postcard goes to every household. So everyone in the community has access to that FAQ if they follow on that. And so we've got a week between now and the annual meeting. If there are specific questions, there's an opportunity for them to contact Jared or myself with that. And of course, we want to encourage people to come to the annual meeting, as well, and to hear more information or to ask follow-up questions.
So Dan, I guess my concern about the timing on this one, I did feel it was slow. Just because we did vote on it, we should have had this ready when we voted, or at least very soon thereafter. The other thing is, none of us have had a chance to see this before 2:30 this afternoon. And if you were working, you might not have seen it at all. And we haven't had any ability to have input on it, saying, well, we could have, this is the question I'm getting from the community, or this is a question I'm getting, or this is what I've heard, so that we can make sure that we answer that well. This was basically put together and drafted, as Jeff would have said, by somebody who has worked with us before, but not closely, not like a Jill. And one of the things was, she was very steeped in, at minimally, the board, the diversity in the board and the opinions that we brought to a particular meeting. So now this is out and it's gone out to everybody, it's a little disingenuous of us to have input on it. So that ties my hands.
Well, I guess I'm actually very pleased with it. I think it did a very nice job, and I think it's one of those things where I was very impressed with how brief it is. You all know my writing, that I'm not ever brief, and it's very hard for me to be, and I thought it was a very clearly written, and I think a very good document. I think had we submitted this to the board a week ago and asked for input for a few days, that would have prolonged it, made it even later, and we'd be sitting here tonight arguing over wording. So I thank you for not doing that, just getting it done and putting it on the website. We all will, those of us who are at the annual meeting, when people are free to ask questions, we can answer those questions then. We can refer them to you or Jared when questions come to us in between. So I feel good about where we are with it. I think it's good. My only concern is I still haven't gotten the postcard, and I'm hoping I know we can't control that. It's bulk mail. We take it there and hope they get it out promptly, but so I'm hoping we get it.
Should be arriving.
Yeah.
You know what's printed?
Some people got it after the meeting, so I'm hoping that's not this year.
Problem with bulk mail.
Right. Okay, thanks.
And just to be clear, so everyone knows, yes, as far as writing it, all the information came from Jared and Joyce and myself.
Right.
Andy Lyons from the EUA, the communications person, helped rewrite and frame, and we went back and forth several times. He revised our work, I revised his work, and so it has been a work in progress. But so yeah, sure, you can always. I as well. I appreciate Andy's viewpoint on that, and as you mentioned, to make it concise. And I think in some respects, having an outside person looking at it through that lens is very helpful. Does it make sense? Because it's a complicated issue. When Jared and I sat down with him to talk about how this works, the cost, the financing, and all that, that was probably the biggest piece. Jared could have written 2 pages about the financing, and how do we get that concise so people can understand. Now, it is really important at the annual meeting. Jared will probably talk at length to that because This is just a very, short summary of it, and that's a really important thing that people need to know. How are we paying for it? How does that affect the overall budget? And I think it ties in nicely, his budget report that will provide context for that in advance, so then when we come to this, and can see, what portion of the budget that is.
Well, again, it's interesting that when we do the FAQs, and again, I agree with Susan, I think it was extremely well written and the numbers are really good. But in the same board docs, I have somebody who handed me this enrollment report, which is only a year, I get that, and this talks about often 5 years. I think it would be extremely helpful to have an enrollment report, just a one-page document that exemplifies these numbers.
We will.
Okay, because this is what came out for this meeting, and this came out for this meeting, and so you have people say, well, wait a minute, I'm not seeing this kind of growth, I'm seeing a difference in like 40 students, and so I'm just saying, this is being able to understand that people are looking at these documents, they're studying these documents. We need to, the other thing is we talk about building capacity in here, and we've given them nothing about building capacity. So one of the things I suggested, and again, I know I just got it today, because I just got this today, we need to have a building capacity on there, because how am I going to know? Two people asked me today, just straight off the top, what's the building capacity at the high school? I'm not sure. What building capacity are you using at Bushel Drumline? The 850? I don't know. So I think it's really important that when you look at the information you provide in here, that we have a simple line document to back that up so they can look at that and say, oh, maybe just a trend line on the population. Because people were being able to see the graphs you put up the other night. It was impressive. But I shouldn't have to sit here and tell us that. That's what I expect the person with the expertise to provide in terms of what they're putting together in the package. So I think we need to work on this. The pieces that match this so that it's a package versus pieces.
Just briefly, if I may, I'd like to clarify for public record that the Jill that's being referred to is Jill Hutchinson, who is no longer in employ with EUA, who had previously been a communications person.
She doesn't work there.
Just,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they said she left.
Oh, I thought she was just like.
She left
I
after we
simply
signed
wanted
the
to
contract.
clarify that information for anyone listening who the Jill was that we're referring to.
And he's her replacement, and he worked with her for a brief time.
Correct.
So not during our work.
But he worked with her with
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you for getting the FAQs done. Those are deceptively simple looking and often very difficult to write, so thank you for that. Yes, I agree. Could we put the logo on? Could we dress it up? Could we spend a lot of time making, but really the content's very good. You don't have a communications person here in-house. We're working on a very part-time basis with someone that we've contracted to provide those services, not necessarily, anyway, always available to us and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm just pleased we got this done in a week's lead time ahead of the annual meeting. I think that's good. I just wanted to say thank you for getting this thing done. There's always lots of ideas anyone has when they look at a document of how they personally would do it differently, right? And I think while I agree with Susan Manning's comment that it would be always desirable to get something a little bit ahead of a board meeting, because I do try to read the stuff, and I had another commitment today, right? So I'm just reading it cold right now. Even having said that, I still appreciate that you got it done. And so we're here to help, but under the circumstances, I just think that we're doing a good job moving this forward and keeping our eye on the ball and helping people have facts that are accurate ahead of the board, ahead of the opportunity next week to vote to approve this. And I really appreciate that being in the public's hands. So it's linked on our website right now. I could find it by going to the annual meeting notice from the homepage, and then clicking from there to the page that says additional information about the annual meeting. So I think it's findable. I'm really pleased that it got done, so thank you.
Anything else for the, oh, okay.
So I've been to a few annual meetings, and I think it's very important that we get turnout at this annual meeting, because this is a very important thing that we're going to discuss. And while our community roundly supports our schools, it only takes 10 people to be at the annual meeting that could change everything for us, right? Because they could vote it down at the annual meeting, and there would be no land, and that would set us back. And that, you know, maybe that's what the community thinks, which would be fine, but if there's 20 people there and it gets voted down, it's a whole lot different than if it goes to a referendum and it's voted down. So it's very important that there's a decent turnout at this thing, so the community, because I know the town of Cottage Grove a couple years ago had like 6 people at their annual meeting, and they made some major decisions, and, and so it's very important that that doesn't happen at our annual meeting. So.
I agree, and I think, you know, we generally have sent an Infinite Campus alert in the past to parents to remind them, here's the annual meeting. In this case, in the email, we highlighted this specific item because it is important that people understand that this is on there. So, I mean, the little bit of feedback I've got, I guess I'm confident we're going to get a larger than usual attendance. How big, you know, we'll see.
Okay. Anything else?
No,
I guess I only have one other question. The subject of doing an FAQ was discussed last time at our community engagement committee. So it would be appropriate maybe for one of us to send an email to that committee to let them know that the FAQs were posted.
Yes.
The same kind of thing. We're not posting it looking for comments, and that's a group that would love to wordsmith maybe. But I think it's more as a courtesy to let them know it's out. And I don't know
thank
if
you
that's
for,
on our
and that was on the to-do list, and we were a little scrambled today. Let's get things out, but
accusation of you not doing. I
But
was just more
thank you for
thinking about
mentioning-
it, and then I kind of go, is that my role as chair, or is that Joyce is willing to do it, or how does that part work?
Also, I should add, as far as having input on the FAQ, I want to mention that we actually did have 2 of those committee members as well that had contacted me with suggestions.
Good.
And so that was incorporated in as well.
Thank you.
The committee members also getting the FAQs, the ones that are on there, not Carrie's committee, Dan's committee, sorry.
They will. They're not officially on the committee yet until it's complete.
It has not been finalized.
So there would be any reason that somebody who looks like they're on the committee wouldn't be on it?
In other words, I think what you're saying is, now that we know that we have 17 committed people, I think you're just asking, can we
Could
just
they
send
get
it
the
to the 17?
FAQs? If we're gonna give them to Carrie's committee, then I think they need to.
I think that's.
We're on the website.
That's a group that I would prioritize. Sorry,
It's on the website.
What?
It's on the website.
Right, but
Their
people
group.
need to know to
So
walk in.
how does Diane Wiedenbeck go on our website?
Well-
I'm sorry.
If she-
Okay. Anything else for the report? Okay. This takes us to our Director of Business Services and his report. And Jared, if you could, for those who are tuning in, just help by clarifying especially the documents that you did include in tonight, that I would greatly appreciate that.
Yep.
And I know you will, but
No
thank you.
problem. So the first item under my report is updating everyone on our third Friday enrollment report. The document that is attached is just comparing last year's growth to this year's growth. The board did have a presentation by Vanderwall back in March where they brought in and did our updated enrollment. That will be something that is shared with the Facility Advisory Committee. In addition to that, the charts that show the low end and the high end will be presented part of the slides at the annual meeting to show where we're seeing some of that growth. The reason this is just showing from last year to this year is obviously the purpose of Third Friday report is typically a driving force for our revenue limits, and also when the board is interested in class size average. And so the document that I have here is just showing you where last Third Friday was. We had 3,434 students. This year, we have 3,483 students, which is an increase of 49 students. And as you can see, we also incorporate the number of sections that we're offering. In addition to that, the average class size for each of those grade levels, except for the high school, which that report will be coming, because that will be a specific course report. And then based on what is in policy and board rule related to class size guidelines and goals. We also did post it, it's not posted under the public side of things, is building capacity. That was in our last facility studies reports. That was something that did come out, which is a great question. But I think right now, one of the tasks that is on our agenda for the Facility Advisory Committee is to finalize those numbers, because when you really talk about building capacity, there are multiple ways to calculate those, and we don't want to necessarily send false information on those numbers to keep changing and things like that. We want to be fully transparent about that. So right now we're up 49 students, which is positive, and we continue to still see new students coming. I don't want to say on a daily basis, but sometimes it feels like that. And but one of the things that I do want to point out, part of the enrollment report, is what we should be very proud of as a school district. Part of that is because of our community supporting a operational referendum. Is if you look at our board class size goals, which is where we typically try to staff. We haven't always been able to do that when budgets were tight. All of our classes, and when I talk about all of our classes, I mean we have 4K that is like a 0.25 over, but we're all at our goal. We're not on the high end of our ranges. And I do recognize that the board, during some tough budget reductions, had to make some modifications to class size. We are meeting where our board has asked for the goal to be at, or below that.
Dean.
Jared, the 2017-18 enrollment that you have here, if we went back to the enrollment projections that were done a few years ago, which were the projected enrollment projections, which now would have been almost 5 years, 4 or 5 years anyway, how does this number hold up against what the formal studies have shown?
Well, for example, if you compare to what the enrollment is suggested for this year, we are off by 30 students. When you have 30,
higher or lower?
This one is lower by 30 students. But when you have 3,400 students, that's pretty close projections when you're trying to anticipate. But here's an example. Last year we grew by 100 students. This year we grew by 50. So, we are, as a growing community, and depending on the number of housing starts and things like that, it's not always the easiest to project. But when we talk about the low end and the high end, we are trending closer to that lower end of things, which is the reason that number was what was put into the FAQ.
I appreciate you showing this number and those projected numbers. There's no significant difference really between them. But I think that as we, from here on out, as we project or give actual enrollments and projected enrollments and that sort of thing, we need to make sure that we have some explanation before it becomes a problem, because people can make those observations.
Exactly.
You too.
The other just clarification and reminding me is that we did not allow open enrollment at certain levels this year. And so that would also contribute to why maybe it was 100 last year and 50 this year, is also because we have levers and switches that we can flip to try to put the brakes on when we feel that we need to. And so I'm thinking about that in the context too. It's not just unfettered growth, it's also trying to be smart within the capacity that we have. So to me, that's another explanation of why the growth would appear to slow down a little bit. It could be because we were intentional about that. Right. But I was trying to remember, or am I making that up?
Nope, and open enrollment is really driven by residential growth. And so that's one of the things that as we are going into January and looking at our enrollment projections, that's what's going to determine the amount of open enrollment kids that we get. So
Jeff?
So even though it's only 1.5% and 49 people, that's still a considerable amount of kids that you're adding to the district, right? I mean,
Oh, yes, I don't want to say 49 is not a small number.
Right. I just
Yes.
don't want, I mean, next week they'll be like, well, you only have 49 kids by then. Because, I mean, we have a finite limit of space. We're not Scotty, where you can always get 10% more, right?
Right.
There's a limit, max limit, where you can't go any higher. Right?
Right.
And
You know, and a couple years ago, we saw a majority of our growth in one specific grade level in a very specific building that was already, you know, a crowded area.
Right.
This year, we've seen growth really similar to what we've seen in past years, spread out through the district. So we saw some of that in Cottage Grove and some of it in Monona, you know, and those are the types of things that...
And we have, what, 2 residential areas that are just starting to get...
2 that are actually moving along in the plotting method. There's
Right.
3 that are still in the planning phases.
Okay.
Yep.
So they're coming.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Just want to be clear for our annual meeting.
All right, Dean and then Susan.
I just come back to my previous question. I just think we need to always be cognizant of the data that we have collected
Mm-hmm.
and how that relates to our statements about growth and current facts,
Mm-hmm.
so that those don't get so far out of sync that we know which data we're talking to
Right.
and from.
And Susan.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. It lends validity to the enrollment projections, which in some years have been, or past groups have been really off.
Mm-hmm.
But since we've been using the Van de Waal, we've been fairly consistent on track. I also just want to clarify that the open enrollment numbers they are used for open enrollment. The projected growth is used to help determine open enrollment. I know you do that. But when you look at the growth figures, that's not incorporating open enrollment into that growth. Those are residential areas for projected growth for residents.
Yes. I mean, they obviously, they're not taking in and adding in a whole bunch of extra open enrollment to get that. They obviously have to be aware of open enrollments,
Right.
and obviously being able to look at that. And I don't think we'll, unless we absolutely start seeing like 200 residents growing. I mean, I think there's going to be a little bit of open enrollment into the district. I mean, but that's ultimately going to be allowed depending on the residential growth. So Vanderbilt has looked at that, but their growth isn't saying that we're going to continue to multiply our open enrollment at the same rate we're doing now. They're looking at, okay, if resident growth goes up by 50, that means there's going to be less ability for open enrollment to come in. So I don't want to say that it's not included, but it's not included to...
So when a resident asks me, when they look at the growth chart, they say, what does that reflect? And my response was, that reflects the growth of the families within the district.
That would be a correct statement.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I'm trying to clarify.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, the criticism that you receive is, if you're projecting for bringing in 100 Madison kids into our school district and we have to build a building for that,
Mm-hmm.
that's not what we're doing. We're projecting for the growth within our district, which is a unified school
Correct.
district that provides services to all the students in all of our communities.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you. Jeff?
Quick question, I don't know if you know the answer to this. But when we didn't merge with the town, the big thing everybody said was Madison's just going to come take over, right? But according to our policy, if they do that and they take a chunk of town of Cottage Grove, those will all be open enroll kids that we'll have to take.
So the school district boundary will not change
Oh,
if the
okay.
city of Madison
So even if
takes
they're
the
Madison,
town.
they'll still be our district, they won't,
Correct.
like before.
Just where we collect our tax
Okay.
payments from will change, or the municipalities, or who we work
So
with.
we'll
But
get more.
our
we have-
school district boundaries do not change if the township is consumed. Now,
Yeah, but very simply, the city school districts, except for the city of Milwaukee, were abolished in about 1984. So the boundaries of a municipality do not necessarily reflect the boundaries of any school district in the state. That's why you have some confusion whether you're in Madison or Pittsburgh or whatever it would be, and so forth.
Did you write that, Bob?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jean. Carrie.
I just wanted to make a comment as we're thinking about information on our website that's available to folks prior to our annual meeting next week. The document that we have from when EUA worked with us on our facility study is the thing you were mentioning a minute ago, Jared, that I so appreciated, that there's multiple ways of factoring capacity. And I had been carrying this particular sheet around with me for a couple of years. I think I've told you that before, because this is a really useful way of framing the capacity question. However, as I'm thinking about it right now, the way that the chart is labeled, one of the columns says current enrollment. And I'm anticipating that that current enrollment was from the 2014-15 academic year, because this was published in the spring of 2015. And so if I'm new to this-ish, and I come to our website and I want to see what's the current enrollment, I just compared these to what you just gave us tonight. So they're significantly higher now, of course. And so there might be some thought that we want to have. I don't think it's ever good practice to go back and edit a document that's dated a particular way, but the header of that column saying current enrollment, without someone coming to this knowing, okay, that's 3 years ago, what the current enrollment was at that time. I just am mindful of that in this moment and thinking about this chart would be super useful if current enrollment was either labeled 2014 or we added a column to it that says 2017 enrollment. It just because.
That chart is part of the 2015 study. So that page that I shared with you will not be used standalone, because it is very deceiving. One of the first things that we'll do, in fact, our plan is to have that ready for the first committee meeting, is a new chart that has current enrollment and one column for capacity, that we will work off of that and say, based upon where we're at, this is the capacity that we're going to have, and then put those enrollment projections on that same page.
I actually really liked having the multiple ways of looking at capacity. I agree it's complex, but we're dealing with smart people. And there's always the question on the table of what we're talking about capacity. Someone will say, but what if you converted one of the computer labs to a classroom? I mean, and so the way that they had that spelled out here with functional capacity by area and capacity based on gross building square footage was where they started to get into, if you stripped away all, spaces the way they're currently used for curriculum and instruction, and you simply put rows of chairs in a building, how many people could you wedge in there? Yeah. That's what that capacity was indicating to me at that time. And that's not what we're about, but that would help answer that question for people that somehow think we're not using the capacity when we want to have a conversation about we're using our facilities in a way that supports the nature of education that needs to be delivered, and the way you need space around you for working in small groups and those kinds of things. You can't just sit quietly in rows packed in like sardines. So just sort of thinking about the capacity of the gross square footage versus our functional capacity. This was super useful because it kind of reminds you how to counter that question that people have of, can't you just fit a few more kids in there? Because when I go in that building, I see this room that's being used for that part, and people are smart and they will ask those questions and just thinking about that.
Right. Well, point.
Just thinking about it.
Thank you. Anything further?
But this is what's on our website currently now. So if someone went looking for capacity now, this is what they would find, I think.
Yes.
Which is why it was not just what you're going to give to the committee eventually updated, but what someone would come to looking for next Wednesday, this is what they would see, I think. Find. Maybe.
Well, on Wednesday, I mean, the most important thing is that enrollment data. I mean, so regardless of what, when you look at 20-year trend and you're talking 750 students, clearly that's a lot of students. And so the focus on the committee and the board's work in this next year is really about, okay, the when part. Clearly, as far as the land purchase, clearly space is an issue in the future. And that's the whole purpose, is to plan for that. The specifics of when, that's the decision you guys get to make in this next year.
Well, I was responding to the fact that in our FAQs, right at the top is the why now, and the first sentence there is enrollment projections, so show several district facilities soon be added near capacity. So it begs the question, well, then what's the capacity? So I went looking for where you could find that, because That's just what I'm getting at. I'm totally feeling like I'm belaboring this, and I don't mean to.
No.
It's just that that's what we're setting up for the conversation if the FAQs say why now and that's why, as opposed to perhaps why now because the land's available now and it won't be available
Yeah.
5 minutes from now when someone else buys it. So that's,
Yeah,
but
I
we've set it up,
apologize.
the capacity
Yeah.
is the reason to do it now?
Absolutely right.
Okay.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I guess I feel ambivalent about this because I think the document is very confusing. And I think that it can be deceptive unless you read it carefully. You have to read the whole thing carefully. I'm very pleased that F was added to describe the middle school because that's a very key thing is the way we structure our middle school. Because if you look at the capacity by square footage, it's quite different. And that building stands out more than the rest, and it's because of that whole team structure, but I think that's just integral to what we do. So, I don't know if there's a way to explain it. I think people may ask this at that meeting. I mean, I don't know that I'd save it for the facility one, but I'd sure think about whether there's another explanation to be given at the top or something, or I don't know, if you post it. And if you do post it, I would, if you decide to post this before the annual meeting or have it available, I would want to update the numbers, as you're going to do for the first
It's on our
meeting.
website. It's available now.
It
It's on our
is,
website now.
but it could be updated with the current numbers with the date on it or something. That's what I'm thinking.
I agree with you.
I just,
In all of our free time
because I
between
was
now and
sitting
next
here
Wednesday.
kind of listening to it, looking at it, thinking, is this good to get out or not? And because I think it is hard to read, but I think enough people might ask about it that maybe you should give it more thought.
I really appreciate Carrie bringing it up. I'm going to make the statement. 40 minutes ago, I asked if we could make sure that we had building capacity as a factor that was provided to people to help them assimilate the growth concept. And the answer was yes. So it's my impression that we will have a document that looks kind of like this, or maybe it's this one, that has building capacity on it. Now, if you want to put building capacity per architect, 19 whatever, fine. Building capacity per facility plan, based on square footage, fine. But we need a number here. Because when we look at Glacial Drumlin, and we look at 918 or 894 students, or the potential for almost 1,000 students being in there in the next 5 years, that building capacity was 850, any way you cut it. Sure, we can pack them in there, but that's the building capacity that Ray, who built the building, told us it was going to be. And that's why people were concerned about that at the time. So we need to have those numbers to have that conversation. Otherwise, you only have half of the conversation. Yeah, we've got growth. Okay, so what difference does it make unless you have capacity in the building that won't hold the kids? That's the argument.
Thank you, Dean.
I agree that you need to have the building capacities, but I think you ought to use the building capacities that are consultants, the various configurations, and not use Bray. I don't think we need to re-argue a referendum of '06. And but it's whether you agree with it or not. I think we use our best data from our people, and we can explain the differences between those capacities. The argument, I think, is well made. We need the data.
Add a comment sooner or something.
Yeah.
Put both. I mean, if there's a controversy about it, put both. Dean, I know that you don't like hearing that, but that was a fact.
Just, this is all we have.
I think this, to me, this is the only one that makes sense to use, and this is the one the facilities committee spent quite a bit of time talking about this, the previous facilities committee. And I would go with these numbers because I think to add more numbers is just confusing. I would say this is what our best guesstimate is right now, and capacity is always a little bit of a guesstimate too. I mean, but I would, I agree with Carrie that you don't want to go back and edit documents, but I'd either, if you don't go back and edit this, I would at least add a column with the current numbers and say enrollment in 2015 or whatever that was. Or I would edit it and say updated, just add a date and say enrollment data updated September 2017 or something, and just have one column. To me, that would be easier. I don't know how hard that is if you can write it right, if you can do it right on this document, convert it to a Word document and do it. You could just type them right in and print it off. That's all you'd have to do really. But then I'd probably present it still with some kind of explanation, because I was sitting here as I was listening, making a list of things I think you might want to include, which I haven't talked about, but I had that one in parentheses because I feel just that ambivalent and just that. But I think you're right. I think there's no avoiding it. I think we have to do it. The more I think about it, the more I hear. It's just challenging to help people understand. I mean, the school board goal one is the one I'd probably try to focus on, probably in the function, those two.
I think you justify the one that you choose for a school, but I think you need, we've hired consultants and population experts to give us this data, and if they give us three numbers, one low, middle, and high, and well, why is it that we chose this number over the other number? I think that their explanations on how they arrived at those numbers are there, and here's our long-term judgment in terms of where we think it might be going to. But I think having the data there would be important. It'll be raised whether you have it there or not.
It will for sure, I think.
And the other factor is class size. You know, we have class size guidelines. We've changed those a little bit. That may have changed a little bit the capacity, but you know, the fact is we have a gym in a building that doesn't hold the kids, and you can't even pull the bleachers out if you're having a volleyball game. That's fact. Okay, and so those are all pieces of things that have been challenges for us. We have an IMC where we have to start lunch. What time did we start lunch at? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm concerned that we're turning this into a belabored discussion item as opposed to simply commentary back to our super. Do you feel that you've gotten the feedback that you needed? And everyone is free to make further contacts, so.
This is why we couldn't deal with the FAQ at a board meeting.
That is correct.
Amen to that.
It's unfortunate we have such a strong vote.
Okay. Thank you. We do not have action items for this evening. We do have a discussion item.
Is Jared still doing the state budget?
I apologize.
Nope, that's all right.
I'm only
It will be
asking
very
because-
quick.
Are we
I'm
skipping
so
it?
sorry, Jared.
Nope.
Is he still here?
I have left the building.
I'm just, yeah, I apologize.
No. It's totally fine. The goal is that we were hoping DPI would have had some official documentation that we could have shared with the board at the time we put that on the agenda. But what I can speak to you is Dan had talked about some, obviously the teacher licensing is one of those big policy things that are coming out of the budgets. When we talk about funding, there was what we had projected going into our budgeting season, that there was no increase on the revenue limits, but there was a $200 per pupil aid increase, and that's what came through. So on the budgeting side, what the governor recommended came through. The only thing that's going to possibly change that is our number of students that actually get incorporated into that on the third Friday. And so we're working through those processes right now. The other thing that for us as a district, we've done the energy efficiencies. We did phase 1, 2, and 3. Those things will stay on our revenue limit because we did the projects prior to the state budget. But in order for any of those types of things to be included in the revenue limit as an exemption, that's no longer part of state law. It's been eliminated through the state budget, specifically the line item veto side of things. And if we wanted to do those types of things, it would have to go through a regular a referendum if we wanted to be outside of our revenue limits. So as more information, and obviously DPI is scrambling, getting through all this stuff. The budget was just signed last week. I'm reminding you that our fiscal year did start July 1, and we should have had a state budget by the end of June. So obviously we had it before our annual meeting. Obviously, anyway. So we are, as every district is across the state, is working through all those details to get everything ready for final approval. But the goal of it is that at the annual meeting we'll do our budget hearing, and then at the end of October, when we have all of our final numbers from state aid, pupil counts, and our property values, then we'll be able to set the levy. But based on what we're seeing or tracking, it looks like our mill rate will decrease from what it was last year, which is positive news. So,
Again with apologies.
nope, that's all right.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, that takes us to board reports. Dean, personnel.
Here's my written piece.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll just read the personnel one. Personnel Committee met with the MGEA and discussed their proposal to amend the teacher compensation plan by inserting years of service in master's degrees as the full salary schedules, along with specific salaries proposals for each row and column. The financial impact of the MGA proposal far exceeded the funds offered by the district. The committee pointed out the high cost of the MGA proposal both exceeded the funds available for salaries, but also abandoned the less structured, more flexible teacher compensation plan. The proposals were left on the table for further discussion. Following the discussion of the MGEA proposal and committee response, Jared presented comparative non-salary benefit data, retirement, contribution, health insurance payments, etc., among Dane County school districts. I think that's the right ones. Is that correct, Jared? Dane County School District?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wasn't there also salary?
There was salaries.
There was salary.
Okay.
That was an important part of the presentation.
Okay.
So I would ask that you add that to that sentence.
Salary and non-salary.
Yeah, I will. This is a superb presentation that captured the attention and raised many questions too. The committee was elated that this information will offer a range of comparative data to inform resource allocation decisions to attract and retain highly qualified teachers and support staff. The committee recommends that the same information should be offered in a forthcoming board workshop. And I think it was very, very interesting because I think it was in one place we were able to look at a lot of the significant costs that go into personnel and which go into salary directly and which are indirect benefits and so forth. So, you know, if one were, I'm not suggesting any changes or anything like that, but it also shows where we are very beneficial compared to other Dane County school districts, for example, in medical costs and that sort of thing, and retirement types of things, and overall in fringe benefits. I think, Dan, that was the point that you've made. I think in general, we are much better off on the fringe benefits, while we do lag some districts in salary type of thing. So, and I think it's, if we're going to make data-based decisions, financial decisions that deal with our goal of attract and retain, that this is find a piece or sets of data that we've had, and I think it's worthwhile that we sit down for an hour some evening and have Jared go through this data with us, so we all understand a little bit where we are and what, if any, of that data we would want to control in one area so we could reallocate in another area in order to achieve our goal of attracting and retaining our staff. So I want to thank you, particularly Jared, for the work that they've done in this. But this was a cooperative project to some extent among a bunch of you business managers, was it not?
Business manager and HR directors.
Suburban schools in Madison and so forth. But it's, I think if we do that, you'll all find that it's very useful data. It doesn't help make decisions any easier, but it does understand and help explain why we may lag slightly in salaries, but we're way ahead in our cash contributions and the benefits that teachers have and so forth that are there. So, is that a fair report? Mm-hmm. The other part was I'm a representative on the mountain.
Dean, before we do that.
Oh, excuse me.
Because again, I was at that meeting. Dan, are we keeping minutes on those meetings as well?
Yes.
In addition to the report?
Yes.
Okay, so just so the board members know, there are minutes and you can see those, they'll be posted, right?
For the next meeting.
Under board docs for the next meeting, because for instance, on this one, the major, as I looked at it, and I just want to make sure that it's clear, when you look at this data that Jared had helped assimilate and Dan helped present, it was, as Dean said, excellent, but the major portion of what we were looking at was the salary. And how many comparable schools did we have? 10?
At least 10.
It was significant,
Yep.
and it was very close to the mix that the board has chosen. So again, it's incredibly good information. But I think it's important that you understand that salary was a piece of that. The other major discussion that we had at that meeting, that's why I want to make sure that we had minutes that capture all, was there was major discussion about the 5-year bump at that meeting. And I don't see that captured in this report. So that's why I think it's really critical that we continue to have minutes. I'm not saying it has to have this kind of detail, but it should exemplify the discussions that occurred in that meeting, because that was a major discussion. Plus, the committee discussed the three-year bump. Using it, not using it. That was really helpful for me as a new member. So I just want to say this is a nice overview, but it didn't capture some of the major discussion, I think. So I'm just adding that. Sorry. Would you explain what the new teacher project is? So
it is not agendized, but
If you're finished.
if the board.
We're not agendized for that tonight.
We're not agendized, so you'll go to
That,
prison.
it's not a report that's expected, so it's not on the agenda, it's a report.
Thank you for sharing the document.
But we can
We
read
tear
it.
off the bottom half of the sheet then.
Don't anybody look.
No, we can-
No one look at it.
Don't look at it.
Don't read it out loud. I read it, but I won't read it out loud.
Thank you all the
How's that?
same.
Are you gonna bring these police officers in to arrest me?
I'm happy to see you had the same reaction to that group as I did. I was able to- so.
Thank you.
This is
If
a
we
teacher-
arrested you, would the money go to Monona or Cottage Grove?
I'm on the agenda, so it doesn't matter.
We just
Yeah,
said
come
it's
to-
not
come to
agendized,
Cottage
so I'd like to move on. Not out of discourtesy, but just, let's move on, please. So the second board report, can I just do letters, C-E-C? This is the
The letters are
community.
just as hard as the name.
It's true,
This
it's
should
true.
be one of the
Community
goals.
engagement.
Yeah, I'm just going with
That's
Community
right.
Engagement
Yeah.
Committee, thank you.
Yes, I'm very pleased to report on this. We had a second meeting with the full committee. Very delighted that the work of the committee has taken off. There are 4 items on our agenda, Tuesday, September 19th. First off, and important for the board to understand, is we reminded the committee that as their discussions proceed on the topics we've identified, there will be some items that would be more appropriate for the superintendent to take action on that fall within his purview, and others that will come back to the board. So the first item for the committee, our most recent meeting, was to review the charge, and Dan was very gracious in clarifying that he intends to take action when things come up that are appropriate and relevant for him to do, which is different than things that the committee will be developing over the next few months, and I'll talk about that in a moment, that will come back to all of you for assistance in affirming that those are the priorities and those are the actions we want to take as a board. So the charge the committee was reviewed and clarified, and I would say as an example, one of the things that one of our committee members, Katie, was very lively in suggesting an FAQ for questions that we might get at the annual meeting, and I give Dan a lot of credit for leaving there, writing it, drafting it. It's on the website. So there are things that will come up in our committee meetings that are appropriate for the superintendent to do. We had an example of the very successful execution of that already. The second thing that we talked about was the priorities that the committee had identified in its 2 meetings ago. We came back now and asked them to join a task group with one of 3 different themes. So each of the committee members completed an interest survey that now Susan and Dan and I will be able to review and align people into smaller task groups along the lines of specific topics that were identified. And it's my expectation that by the end of the semester, and sometimes I use the word semester, although it may or may not be relevant here, but by the end of the semester, meaning the end of the fall here, that I'll be able to come back to this group. We are aiming for either the board meeting on November 21st or December 13th for me to be able to come back here with some specific items that the members of our committee have recommended for board action.
I don't know how to use this.
So.
I just did my mistake, so I apologize.
All right, everyone on Facebook, change gears. I'm still, giving a very lively report. And then third thing was the annual meeting. And in planning for this committee, we fully recognize the opportunity of having community members, citizen members, understand and anticipate the purpose of the annual meeting. And in this particular year, it was extremely useful that we had it on our agenda. We were able to talk with them about what the expectations are, and many of them plan to attend. Like I already said, it gave us an opportunity to talk in detail with citizens and get some important feedback about how to run that meeting or what the opportunity is from a community engagement perspective. And lastly, we had on our agenda a legislative liaison report that Susan Fox gave. And as the committee continues, one of her questions for the committee is in what format would they like to receive that report, and so that will continue. But as you know, that's still in the charge to us, being that the committee is community engagement, communication, and government relations. And so we still have government relations on our radar, and it's been especially busy at the Capitol the last few weeks. So we are keeping that committee apprised appropriately, in my opinion. And thank you, Susan, again, for being willing to do that. Whole ton of work. And then I think I already mentioned, but many of the committee members will be attending annual meetings, so we'll see them Wednesday the 4th. Good, thank you.
Can I just ask, Carrie, one of the things that one of the members mentioned, and I tried to explain that I think it did come in under the agenda item, but there was an item that was actually discussed by the committee, which was great, and it was a great item for that committee to discuss, but it wasn't agendized. It actually rolled in under that annual meeting and things that were going to be discussed at the annual meeting. But they were just a little concerned about that. And again, having those discussion items are great. It's tough to have it be limited by an agenda item. But if you're going to talk about a land purchase, I think the community wants to know you're going to talk about that at that meeting. So, but it was great to get that input. So I don't, especially a controversial issue like that right now, I would just, I loved sitting there and hearing you talk about it, but I don't know what your thoughts are about that. I told him to talk to you, that you're the chair.
All right. Thank you. That moves us to possible action items, of which we have none. So that takes us to our discussion item, which we have one tonight, board policy 5500, if we want to articulate it that way, student code of classroom conduct.
Okay, so last meeting we reviewed the board policy on student suspension and expulsions and talked, my recollection of the discussion was not so much even about the written policy, but where does that fit in with regard to our behavior plans at our schools and as well as our goals in our strategic plan and building goals with regard to our equity work. And I thought in that respect it was a really good discussion. And so I think we need to continue and understand the clarification as far as what we're doing, what our expectations are in the schools for our staff and administrators, and where does policy fit into that work versus other pieces. And so in the course of that discussion, there was some follow-up about, well, what about the code of conduct? And that is something that requires, some committee work that was kind of talked about. So I just wanted to clarify for the board what our policy says, what the statutes require, not for action tonight, more of a point of information, and that's something for you to consider in our future work about where that may or may not, fit in. to our equity work. And so, so I put a couple attachments on, of course, the actual policy 5500 is pretty straightforward, simply saying that we will have a code of conduct as the statutes require and what it will contain. But that's not the actual code that was adopted by the board. So it was good that it forced us to do a little bit of research to find out, well, are we compliant with state law? So in doing the research, what I found is, and I kind of recalled this because I was a first-year principal when this was enacted, so I thought I was familiar, and my research actually kind of confirmed some of that this was adopted actually way back in 1997, and it was actually a result shortly after the Columbine shootings, and where school safety was really a topic of discussion nationwide. And so that was the time when the state legislature mandated that schools have safety plans. And then this particular statute actually was talking about giving teachers the authority to remove disruptive students from class in the context of having safe schools. To be honest, I think it actually is not consistent with the equity work that we do today and what we expect. It's certainly, for safety purposes on its surface, of course, you have to have the authority for, if they're truly disruptive students, to be able to remove from a setting. But the policy and the code and the statutes are very rigid and very clear about, well, you must have a policy that says here are the conditions in which students can be removed. And so I did include the attachment of the actual act that was written back, or approved, back in 1997. And it says that very clearly it gives teachers the ability to remove disruptive students. And it says that the code of conduct that must be developed must contain 4 pieces. And again, it's very punitive in nature. You have to have, oops, lost my place there. That there must be an alternative, or there's options, must include an option for an alternative setting, another class, and so on. So I don't need to continue on and read through it. So what have we done at Monona Grover, what was done previously? So the district, we went back, Joyce went into the archives, found the minutes from 1999, and found that the board actually did approve a code of conduct at that time. And what wasn't clear is that code the one that still is in effect? Well, we researched a little bit further. We found that the board did review it 5 years later in 2004. I thank Susan for some research as well to found that document, and that was in our previous board manual before we made the switch to Neola. It was actually listed as an exhibit, and so that's attached for you. So that's what's in effect. That's the last action the board took. And so that is the code of conduct that we live under. And you can see it's just very, clear. Here are the list of rules, and if students violate these, they can be removed from class. Now, our new Neola policy, not only does it state that, we have to have the code of conduct in compliance with the statute, it also states that the board shall be reviewed and approved periodically, which I think is a good statement to have. And it hasn't been reviewed since 2004. So 13 years later, I think it is relevant to do that. So again, the purpose tonight is to provide that information, perhaps a little bit of discussion, not to make any decisions, but then to think about, if we want to rewrite that code. And then there are some things in there about when it was initially developed that it was supposed to be a committee. Now, whether for revision you use a committee or not, it may not be required, but that's something to be the prerogative of the board. And the statutes do say if you are going to have that committee, the board would appoint such a committee. As well. So something to consider, and could we perhaps revise it in the future with an equity lens? If we do revise it, I would hope that we would. And so, but have not at this point done any work on what that might look like. Okay, so I'll stop there.
Do we, administrative guidelines, I know you've been working on this, do the administrative guidelines that go with 5500 contain any of this?
Great question. So there is a template for the administrative guidelines that go along with this, and actually the template we can't use because we have our own code. So the template, we will insert this code into there. Yeah, so that
So
There'll be a
this is
couple
still in
bit-
effect, and this
Correct.
will be
It will.
visible at some, when we
Yeah.
get that open, okay.
And then the expectation is that individual schools as well have their specific school rules that, support or complement this code of conduct.
So this was written by Neola?
No.
That we have right now?
No, what we have right now was written back in 2004 by
I thought
someone.
Neola updated all the policies.
This isn't a policy, it's an
Right.
exhibit.
Neola policy says
Oh,
you
I
shall
see.
have a code of
Gotcha.
conduct.
Okay. Gotcha.
So the code of conduct itself is not an actual policy.
Mhm.
The policy just references that you have to have one.
Let me see. So,
Which means we can update this more easily when we feel like it.
Yeah, and but if it's to be updated, it does have to be approved by the board. It's
But
not
kids-
something administrative.
kids can be held responsible for not following the code of conduct. because
Correct.
It's not a policy.
Correct, yes.
And as I talked to you earlier, I think it's important that we do rewrite this, but I think it's important that we get all our information sooner rather than later, in terms of gender, equity, risk ratio, minorities, special ed, like how are we doing with all this stuff?
Mhm.
Like where are we at as a district? And I mean, we've been talking about this forever, and we haven't got that yet. I think it's,
Well, you have
Maybe.
gotten it.
Yeah.
You've got, you had an equity audit where data was, given to the board, and so, we'll certainly revisit that, but the board has received that in the
Yeah.
past.
and it's given us all that information now, in terms of suspensions
Not
and
that's
expulsions and
specific
kicked out.
necessarily.
Right, I mean, how do we have, we need that.
But we have
specific
that, and our
information.
schools have that data, and they look.
Do we have
at that
a
data.
data dashboard to go through that? Is that how we get it?
Well, our data is, it depends. We have it from, our academic data, of course, we have tons of different places that comes from. Our behavioral data, some of it is what we record in Infinite Campus. We also have other things that are recorded in the school, tied to our PBIS, and so there's several different avenues where it is, but.
Because if we don't have a good data dashboard, maybe we should look at doing it. So we can review this on a moment. Because, I mean, we need to know, like, how many kids are getting kicked out, who is getting kicked out, where are they getting kicked out, what day are they getting kicked out? Like,
And the principals have
yeah, we need to know that. I think if we're gonna realistically look at a new code of conduct, we need to know that information too.
Just a point of question. What would be the process that this would be revised?
That's a good question. I think because it's not an actual policy, but it's a policy, so whether you work through the policy committee to start with, but essentially, the board has a lot of discretion on this one.
I mean, you're not looking for volunteers, or, like, I could voluntold somebody who wants to
I have an
work
idea.
on
We
it.
can put together a committee of community members, teachers, administrators, and parents, and redo the whole thing.
Yeah, but understand, the code of conduct statutorily is very specific. There are 4 things that have to be in there.
Right.
And it's all about how do you remove a kid, just
Right.
what things allow a teacher to remove a kid from class.
Right.
That's very different than other disciplinary things where we're talking about suspension. This has nothing to do with suspensions.
Right.
That's simply removing a disruptive student from class.
Right.
So I think what you're getting at, there are other avenues besides a code of conduct that are going to have an impact on that. And that's our practices that we do in the school. The PBIS is the number one thing, where it's preventative, and we're talking about behaviors. That's what's going to change your behaviors. This is reactionary about when the disruption does occur, then how do you deal with it?
Right.
And what type of disruption?
Right. And we don't know what's going on with disruptions, so nobody can answer that right now. Like, I don't know if there's 2 disruptions a week or 700 disruptions a week that are.
Well, it doesn't say how many there are, it just says what
Right,
they have
so
to
we
be
don't know-
like.
we don't know
Behavior that
what-
may constitute sexual or other harassment, repeated or extreme verbal.
We don't
conduct.
know what we're dealing with.
Well, I think the question is that you're asking is, are the things listed here in sections A to H here for behavior that we've identified and labeled as these behaviors in our district? One of them is loud, obnoxious, or outrageous behavior, right? And so if you were looking at this and saying, is that still 13 years later, what we want to have here, or is that wording now needing to be updated in some way? If that's the question on the table, that's why I was asking Dan what he would suggest as the process by which some body of people would look at this and maybe propose some additional wording or different wording.
Yeah, because just, we're still in this process. This is something, I guess my first step is I'd like to review it with our administrative team and get input with that, and does this actually have any impact on what we're doing on a day-to-day basis? This actual program.
That seems great.
Susan and then Dean.
Well, I was just going to say, we have had the last few years PBIS school, they've been in the PDSAs at buildings to track and disaggregate referrals, suspensions, disciplinary measures, and we do get those reports. I think we get them, but we get them annually usually. I mean, so you have to kind of remember. So maybe what we need to see at some point is, and when one of our check-ins this year on that issue, is just how do we look over the last few years when we've been focusing on it, because we have focused on it as part of our equity work, and that is part of our strategic plan this year. And I know because we saw those PDSAs, there are schools are working on them. So I think in general we've made some progress. Whether we've made as much as we want, I don't remember if we've hit the goals, but they're 3-year goals. We're working toward them. So I think that would be one piece that would be helpful to go over. And yes, certainly I would want staff input on these, and I think that's a good place to start. And then if we decide to view some of these, also the WSB Policy Resource Guide has some background information, questions to kind of ask yourselves to think about it. I just wanted to, it's pretty helpful. I mean, I looked it over when I saw this was on the agenda. It's another good starting place or background.
Dean,
I would suggest you start with schools and staff to see practices and how it fits in with your current practices and goals and that sort of thing.
I would agree in that the practitioners are the people that live this every day.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of them would have seen this language, recently. And I also wonder, at some level of actually getting some student feedback, perhaps, as well. And I don't know if that's a climate. I don't know what the vehicle is, but I think that voice would be important as well. But starting with the admin seems like a great place to start.
I would rewrite the first sentence for sure. Respect my authority sentence, because I think just like we know punitive doesn't work, authoritarianism doesn't work either. We're looking more, I think, to get students to have more community in the school. You really have to join with, not to or for. So you have to work with them on an equal basis, empower them to be part of us. You must respect my authority.
What is in the first paragraph?
The first line. Respect for law and for those persons in authority shall be expected of all students.
I got the wrong page.
You're quoting the policy, not the code.
That's the policy, not the code.
Right.
The general board policy. So it's two different things.
I'm looking at 5,500.
Well, if you start from the code, you can move back to the policy.
So can I recommend this? I will review this with the administrative team, and based on the suggestions from there, it's at a near future, we'll report back to the board.
That seems awesome.
Thank you. That takes us to an incredible list of future meetings, which I would prefer to not read aloud, but I'm happy to. Would anyone like that read aloud?
So
Okay.
these are the materials for Monday night?
Yes,
Okay,
with
thank
the
you.
schedule.
If I could just make one quick comment regarding the meetings.
Sure.
So we have a meeting on Monday night with the interviews, and what we'd like to do, and I realize it might get a little late, but to at least begin the discussion with regard to the discussion about the selection process, and we'll have it agendized that way. And because we would like to get the selection sooner or later so that the CM is able to participate with the Facilities Advisory Committee. And so another option is if we, it gets late or you can't, you're not prepared to have that discussion Monday night, is a possible special meeting prior to the annual meeting. If we wait until the next regular board meeting, now that pushes everything back 2 weeks, again, and then they've missed the first Facilities Advisory Committee. So we could talk more about this Monday night, but I guess the point I just wanted to make it clear, we want to definitely begin the deliberation about the selection Monday night after the 3 interviews. And then we can determine at that night where you're at in the selection process. But I guess what I'm hearing is if we don't finish that night prior to the annual meeting, I guess
We could meet before it's
I mean, is that an option?
I won't be available for the
I signed up for a commitment prior to it, but,
That was gonna be my question, is how many people are gonna be there Monday night? I'm perfectly fine to interview the 3 people and then have the discussion of what we want, but I didn't know how many board members can be present, because
I plan to be there Monday night. So
As
everybody
I
doesn't,
know.
isn't able to be there Monday night?
is everyone there Monday
I
night?
think we're okay.
Okay, that was my only
So
question.
maybe we could decide that then, I don't know if
Yeah.
I could still get out of that and change it to the other one or not, I probably could.
I don't know.
I was just gonna go to the first part of the WSB thing, the workshop on the
On
legislative update, but I also wanna go to
Wednesday.
see something, so.
Yeah.
And then go to the
Okay.
annual meeting.
But the
It
very
makes
least-
good sense
Before the
to
annual
have
meeting.
the
So we can
people
decide
come in
Monday
and
night
then-
if we need
okay.
to
Yep,
continue.
When was the Monday night meeting start?
I wondered that too.
Like a month ago or 2 months, I mean, I've had it on my calendar for a long time.
In the summer.
This is
Yeah,
the
summer, a long time ago.
I wanted to go to the Forever Friends meeting, but that's on Monday night also.
I wondered that too, so I was like, what did you decide that?
It was on the
So it's something from January way back.
I think it was
back like in.
So yeah, that's fine. Oh, okay.
I've had interview for construction manager.
Right.
I think I was in denial because I just didn't write it in my
Do we have
calendar.
a motion to
I'm
adjourn?
not going to that. Oh, I'll move to adjourn at 9:33.
Do we have a second?
Can I ask just one?
I'll second.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I'll say it after it's all over with.
Well, you can do it before we vote.
Joyce, are you okay with our?
I got it, thank you.
Wait, okay.
I'd just like to, I think when we chose the last person, like this one here, it'd be nice to have a little bit of a job description of who we're going to be selecting, what their job
Or what we're
description is.
selecting these people for.
So when we open the meeting on Monday, we should provide.
You're asking me to select these people.
Right.
Am I gonna do it on their personality, on their dress, their clothing, or what it is they're going to be supposed to do?
I see, a criteria.
A rubric? Yeah, well, you'll have a rubric for Monday nights.
What?
You'll have a rubric for Monday nights.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, we still need to have a voice adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Sure.
All right, thank you.